5 things that if President Mahama did, the economy could be better. We've talked about the first one, which he identifies as the monetary policy of the Bank of Ghana. And he's critical of the Bank of Ghana's policy that was announced recently relating to Forex. He thinks that it's counterproductive and it should be withdrawn immediately. So you can send us your emails on goodeveninggana@gmail.com. Mr. Kyeremanten is here. Some text messages are already coming in, and I'll be reading them in due course. What's the second one, sir?
Well, before I move on to the second one, still on the first one. Now, it is also possible that through policy instruments that the government and the central bank, for that matter, can introduce incentives that would encourage an increase in the level of remittances. You know, currently, the level of remittances
has dropped.
It's dropped. But you can use policy tools to enhance the flow of remittances, which is a major source of foreign currency in any country, not only in Ghana. You know, so that's another thing that the government should be looking at. But on the other side of the equation, remember I talked about the fact that if you are using all the foreign currency you have to import, then you come to ground zero. And so whilst we attempt to increase the flow of foreign currency, we must introduce measures that will limit the outflow of foreign currency. And unless we appreciate and understand as a country that we cannot continue importing everything that we consume, even things that ought to be produced, whether as infant industries or as matured industries, we have to make that conscious decision. I know that the government has started talking about it, but it's not enough talking about it. We have to be able to demonstrate that we've put in place significant policy interventions that will promote local industry. Again, you remember, during President Kufuor's administration, apart from promoting the PSIs, which were export-oriented, to increase our export revenues, we also looked at certain industries which were targeted not at import substitution, because people don't like to hear the word import substitution, but at what I call import competition. You are helping local industries to produce competitively so that they can compete with imports, because it's going to be difficult to literally eliminate imports. And so we introduced what we call the District Industrialization Program.
This was under PSI?
No, this was a separate program. The PSIs
were intended,
yes, the PSIs were intended to develop new strategic pillars of growth to diversify the export base. So all the PSIs were export-oriented to bring in foreign currency. But then the District Industrialization Program, under which each district was to be supported through the private sector to establish one major industrial establishment. That was supposed to be for import competition or import substitution, if you wish to.
So what happened to these programs?
Well, these were all programs that were started, and obviously once we came out of government, I'm not sure whether they've been continued with the
before
same
you get to
level
the two,
of
just before,
intensity.
you'd like to think of yourself, Mr. Kyeremanten, as a successful trade minister in Ghana?
Well, I would say in all modesty, yes.
Why?
Because it's on that basis, well, because I combined as minister vision with action. And I think that the core of success in policy formulation and programming is to be able to articulate a clear vision which then leads action in terms of implementation. So I was very clear in my mind the first day I got into office that I needed a clear vision of developing an export-led strategy, but also supported by import competition. So everybody in the ministry knew that this was the way forward. It was within that context that all these programs that I'm talking about were developed. But then just also to appreciate the fact that I then initiated the drafting for the first time of a comprehensive trade policy for Ghana. Because the first day I set foot into the ministry, I thought that my Bible and my reference book would have been the trade policy of Ghana. So I started asking for the trade policy of Ghana. And I mean, I got different documents, printed. And I said, well, what we need is a comprehensive document, which we can call the National Trade Policy. So I initiated that policy, and I'm proud to say that together with the team that we had in the ministry and with the help of some external advisors, we produced what I think was an excellent national trade policy document.
Is it still there?
It is still there, but we didn't stop at that, and this is where I think we made a difference. Having a policy is only a guide to action. It is not a program, it is a policy. If you want the policy to be implemented, you need a trade sector support program. So we went beyond the trade policy to develop a comprehensive trade sector support program, which then projectized every single policy prescription in the trade policy. And if Ghanaians knew what we have in that trade sector support program, and if we were able to convince our development partners to put resources behind this trade sector support program, half of our problems will be dealt with.
That's interesting. Let's not take too much of your time. Let's go on to the second one. Which is the second one that you think that if the president could fix, things will get better?
Interest rates. Again,
It's connected to the first one.
Everything is connected with each other. Everything is connected. That's why it's very important that you try and nip in the bud anything that would destabilize the economy, particularly the fall in the value of the currency. Now, interest rates, the only reason why I think interest rates are very important is that it is probably the biggest cost center, at least in Ghana, in terms of cost of production. That's the cost of capital. And so if the central bank, working together with the Ministry of Finance, do not initiate interventions that will bring the level of interest rates down, then that will stimulate a spiral in inflation. Again, this is where I may also disagree with some of the economists who have suggested that the inflation that we have in Ghana is based on what economists will generally describe as demand pull inflation. Currently, I think the psychology that is driving inflation targeting in Ghana is that there is too much money chasing too few goods.
Yeah.
So that is the sense that I get in terms of analyzing the central bank's policy on interest rates. But I tend to have a different view, that it is not driven by the supply of money or excess liquidity, but rather it's a cost push inflation, as we say in economics, meaning that it is the build-up of costs that would be driving inflation. So if we increase the policy rate only to be able to mop up excess liquidity, which I believe is being done now, then it will be counterproductive because that is what is fueling the inflation. Secondly, domestic borrowing by government. And this is very simple, even in our own individual lives. If you go to a lender and the lender realizes that you always need money because you are cash strapped, they would always increase the rate at which they lend to you. And so unless government reduces its borrowing, the domestic borrowing by government, the rates, interest rates on treasury bills would always be going up. If the interest rate on treasury bills, the rate on treasury bills go up, that also influences the lending rate. And so it is all linked to the public debt of government. Government simply has to understand that they cannot continue borrowing because that is going to fuel also increase the interest rates. And that is also linked to inflation. And it is not enough for government to seek refuge in increasing taxes on almost everything that they can think of.
Is that what this government is doing?
Well, I mean, it is there for you to see. And we have to find, as a country, other creative and innovative ways of raising revenue, not necessarily through the increase in taxes, because then that creates another spiral for inflation. But obviously, government needs to appreciate that they have to reduce significantly the level of domestic borrowing. Because once you get into significant levels of borrowing, then you increase your public debt. If you increase your public debt, then you increase the deficit, the budget deficit, because you don't have enough money to even service your debts. So it's all connected. The second and the third, the interest.
Let's get on to the third.
That's inflation. The third is inflation.
Inflation, wow.
And they are all related.
Yeah, but the first and the second, if not handled properly, will generate inflation naturally.
Absolutely. It's all linked together. And that's why it's absolutely critical that we find a more sustainable solution to the decline in the value of the cedi.
Wow. So the fourth?
The fourth is government debt. Now, government debt stock now, foreign and domestic, is about $25 billion. $25 billion. $25 billion. That's big. And that's
foreign
huge.
And domestic debt?
Yes. 50-50. There's about 50-50.
What's the problem with government's foreign debt, really? Because there are some economists who think that should not be a concern to an economy that is stimulating growth. You may have foreign debt, you can keep it, but you need to stimulate growth. If you're not stimulating growth, then that's a problem. If you borrow to stimulate growth, then that's right. And that used to be the argument of Yasaf Mafo and others, your colleagues.
Well, you see, if the Ministry of Finance, the government, the central bank believes that the responsibility that is bestowed on government to embark on development projects gives them a carte blanche, to continue borrowing beyond their capacity to service the debt, obviously, that is not sustainable. And so the way I would look at this is that let us look at the sources of financing. Because you're talking about how does government finance development projects without borrowing. That is the challenge that you are throwing up. The way I would look at it creatively is that there are four sources traditionally of financing development projects.
Yeah.
First is to use domestic savings as a source of financing public debt. But the level of domestic savings is so low that that cannot become the catalyst for driving investments. The second window normally will be through public funding. And if the government is not earning enough revenue to make it possible for public funds to be used to finance government expenditure or public infrastructure financing, then obviously that also becomes a window that is limited. The third source normally will be what we call official development assistance. That's from development partners. But we all know that one, there's a decline in official development assistance. There is donor fatigue. And aid has never been the solution to development financing. And so that cannot be used as the key to financing development projects. So we have to increasingly start looking at foreign direct investment and flow of foreign capital. That is what many countries have done. Because of our peculiar circumstances, FDI, being able to attract foreign capital, will become a major source of financing development expenditure. So government cannot continue looking at the responsibility of building schools, of building hospitals, and all the infrastructure projects that arguably they have responsibility for. They cannot look at that as a reason for continuing to borrow, because that is leading us into
So you are worried about
debt.
the foreign debt and the domestic debt at 25 billion?
Yes.
Is it reducing our capacity to borrow more?
Oh, obviously, yes, it is.
Okay.
Because when you go to the capital markets to borrow, their rating agencies that will define your borrowing credibility. And if your debt servicing ratio goes above a certain point. See, right now, our debt to GDP ratio is about 55%.
Yeah.
And in the literature, once it crosses